It started with a knock on my door at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. I was still half asleep, my coffee barely brewed, when I opened the door and saw two men in blue jackets standing there, each with the bold white letters HOA printed across their chest. One of them smiled too politely, the other didn't bother to hide his disgust. "Mr. Carter," the taller one said, "we've received multiple complaints about noise coming from your property." Noise? I blinked, confused. I lived alone, and the only sound I made was the occasional late-night movie or guitar strum, nothing that deserved a morning visit from the HOA. I asked them to clarify what kind of noise. "Loud music," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "Voices, possibly arguments." I felt my heart sink. Arguments? There hadn't been any, not since my wife left 6 months ago. I shook my head and told them they must have the wrong house. But they were already taking photos of my porch, my garden, my mailbox, everything. Then the short one said something that stuck with me. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. We've been monitoring you for weeks." I wanted to ask what that meant, but they turned and walked off before I could say another word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the street. The whole neighborhood was quiet, eerily quiet, actually. A row of perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, and American flags waving in the same direction. Nothing moved except the sprinklers clicking in rhythm. It felt like the entire place was watching me. The first real sign that something was wrong came 2 nights later. I woke up at 2 a.m. to a faint scratching sound, like someone moving outside my living room window. At first I thought it was a raccoon, but then I heard it again, a metallic clink like a tripod leg hitting concrete. I quietly got up, grabbed my flashlight, and crept toward the curtains. Through the narrow slit, I saw a man crouched near my fence line, holding what looked like a small recording device. He wore the same blue HOA jacket. My heart pounded. What the hell were they doing? I threw open the door and shouted. The man bolted, sprinting across the yard before I could even get a good look at his face. By the time I reached the street, he was gone, just the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. But the next morning, there was a yellow envelope on my porch. Inside, a notice. "Second warning, continued noise violations may result in penalties or eviction." I couldn't believe it. I called the HOA office immediately, demanding to speak to someone in charge. A calm female voice answered. "Mr. Carter, our officers have audio recordings of excessive disturbances coming from your address. I'd advise you to take this seriously." I asked her to play them for me, proof that I was making any noise. But she said the recordings were confidential. That's when I realized something wasn't right. How could they accuse me of something, refuse to show evidence, and still threaten to evict me? For the first time, I started to wonder if this was personal. You see, I wasn't exactly the neighborhood favorite. When I first moved into Ridgewood Estates, I didn't fit in with the manicured families and golf carts. I was a sound engineer working from home, and my house was the only one that didn't look like a catalog photo. I'd once spoken up at a homeowners meeting about how the HOA fees were mysteriously increasing every quarter. That didn't sit well with the board. Especially not with Greg Lawson, the HOA president, a man who treated the neighborhood like his private kingdom. Greg was the kind of man who wore sunglasses indoors and called himself community management. He owned the biggest house on the block and threw mandatory social events that everyone attended just to avoid fines. After that meeting months ago, he'd told me, smiling, "Some people just don't know how things work around here." Now I was beginning to understand exactly what he meant. That night, I decided to set up my own equipment. If they could record me, I could record them. I installed 3 small security cameras around the perimeter of my house, all motion-activated, all silent. I even hid one inside the garden gnome by the walkway. For 2 nights, nothing happened, just the normal sounds of crickets, wind, and the occasional car passing by. But on the third night at 1:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the live feed and froze. There were 3 figures in my yard. 2 men and a woman, all wearing HOA jackets, standing near my fence, pointing a small microphone toward my living room window. I watched as one of them whispered something and the others nodded. Then they set a small black device on the ground, something that looked like a parabolic microphone, and started recording. I could hear faint voices through the mic feed. They were talking about me. Greg said he wants clear proof this time. Doesn't matter if there's no sound, we can always mix in something later. My hands trembled. They weren't just eavesdropping, they were fabricating evidence. I stayed quiet, barely breathing, afraid they'd notice the camera light. After about 15 minutes they left. But that was enough. I had it all on video. The next morning I went to the HOA office, ready to confront them. The building was small and sterile, gray walls, framed photos of smiling families that didn't seem real. When I walked in, Greg was sitting behind the front desk like he owned the place. Well, Mr. Carter," he said, smirking, finally decided to come by. I told him I had proof his people were trespassing and recording me illegally. He leaned back, arms crossed. Proof. I showed him the video on my phone, the figures, the microphones, everything. His smile didn't fade. He just chuckled. Cute trick, but you realize, of course, that recording on private property without permission is a violation of HOA policy. I could fine you for that. I felt heat rising in my chest. You're out of your mind, they broke into my yard. He tapped his pen lazily on the desk. If you don't like how this community operates, you're welcome to move out. For a moment I couldn't speak. His calm arrogance was almost worse than his threats. I left before I said something I'd regret. But that night I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. Over the next week, I started gathering everything. Copies of every HOA notice, screenshots of their emails, audio from my own security recordings. And then one night, something unexpected happened. My camera caught Greg himself, standing outside my house at 3 a.m. He wasn't alone this time. There was another man with him, someone I didn't recognize. He wasn't wearing HOA clothing. They were arguing quietly, and though the audio was faint, I managed to make out fragments. Need to cover it up before the inspection. That microphone you planted, did you wipe it? I leaned closer, heart pounding. They knew they planted something. And suddenly, everything made sense. All the noise, complaints, the fake evidence, they weren't trying to silence me because I was noisy. They were trying to silence me because I'd seen something. You see, a few months before this all started, I'd noticed strange construction behind the HOA office, supposedly a maintenance shed. But every night, trucks came and went, and no one could explain what was inside. I'd mentioned it casually at the last HOA meeting, asking if our fees were funding it. The room went silent. Greg's smile tightened. And now it was clear they thought I was a threat. The next day I searched every inch of my house. Under furniture, behind the TV, even inside air vents. And sure enough, hidden behind a bookshelf, taped inside an electrical outlet, was a small black listening device. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. If they wanted recordings, I'd give them recordings. That evening I set up my own trap. I called my friend Melissa, another homeowner who'd quietly told me she didn't trust the HOA either. She came over and we staged a conversation loud enough for the hidden microphone to hear. We talked about how Greg and his people were taking money from HOA funds and how there were security tapes that could expose everything. It was bait and I knew they'd take it. Sure enough, the next morning, there was another envelope waiting for me. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a summons to a disciplinary hearing for false accusations against HOA officials and repeated disturbances. I laughed out loud. They walked right into it. When the day came, I entered the community hall where the board met. The place was full, homeowners, board members, even a few curious neighbors. Greg sat in the center like a judge, flanked by his loyal officers. He started the meeting with his usual self-satisfied tone. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this community values peace and respect. Unfortunately, your behavior has been disruptive. We have audio recordings of aggressive outbursts and defamatory statements made within your home." I let him finish, let him play his little role. Then I stood up and said, "You mean this audio?" I pulled out my phone, connected it to the projector, and played the clip I'd recorded from my security cameras. the one showing his officers planting microphones and Greg himself talking about covering things up. The room fell silent. Greg's face went pale. Someone in the audience whispered, "Is that real?" I paused the video right where Greg's voice said, "Did you wipe it?" Then I looked straight at him and said, "You were right, Greg, some people really don't know how things work around here." But he recovered faster than I expected. He slammed his gavel and barked, "That's enough, this footage is illegal, meeting adjourned." And before anyone could speak, he stood up and stormed out. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs, neighbors turning to each other in disbelief. As I walked home that evening, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But I was wrong. When I got back to my driveway, there was smoke coming from my backyard. I ran inside, heart racing, and found my trash bin blazing with fire. Someone had set it on purpose. And in the ash, I saw the melted remains of what looked like a small audio recorder. That's when I realized Greg wasn't done yet. He was panicking, desperate, and now he was covering his tracks. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the street, waiting for any sign of movement. Around 3 a.m., I saw headlights stop in front of my house. A dark SUV, no license plate. Two figures stepped out. They didn't come to the door this time. They went straight to my side gate, flashlights sweeping across the yard. I picked up my phone and started recording again. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. They were here to take something, maybe to destroy more evidence. But this time I wasn't going to just watch. I slipped out the back door quietly, phone still filming. As I rounded the corner of the house, one of the men turned, and our eyes met under the beam of his flashlight. It was Greg. He froze. Then without a word, he bolted toward the SUV. The car sped off before I could get close, tires screeching down the silent street. But I had him clear as day on camera. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about HOA drama anymore. Something much bigger was happening here. Because the next morning when I tried to play back the footage, the file was gone, deleted. My cloud backup account had been wiped too. Someone had hacked me. And that's when I realized. They were still listening. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. Every creak in the house, every flicker of light outside made me jump. I started unplugging everything that could be used to listen, the smart speaker, the TV, even my router. But paranoia only works until exhaustion takes over. By the 3rd night, I fell asleep on the couch with my phone still in my hand. At 4:12 a.m., a faint notification sound woke me up. Motion detected backyard camera. I opened the feed, bracing myself for another late-night visit. But this time what I saw didn't make sense. There was no one there, just the shadows of trees swaying. Then I noticed it, a small red blinking light in the grass. I went outside slowly, flashlight in one hand, my phone recording in the other. The air was cold, the kind that made sound travel differently. When I got closer, I saw it wasn't a light at all, it was the reflection from a lens. Another recording device hidden under a pile of leaves. I picked it up and turned it over. It was newer than the last one, sleeker, professional. And scratched into the plastic on the back were 3 initials, GL. I didn't even have to think about who that belonged to. Greg Lawson. By then I realized this wasn't a game anymore. The HOA wasn't just breaking rules, they were stalking me. I needed help, someone who could do more than just sympathize. That morning, I went straight to the local police department. I told the officer everything, the recordings, the break-ins, the planted devices. He listened politely at first, until I mentioned the HOA. Then his tone changed. He leaned back, folded his arms, and sighed. "Mr. Carter, I'm gonna be honest, we've had complaints about that group before, but every time we try to look into it, the board lawyer sends paperwork that shuts us down." "So you're saying they're untouchable?" I asked. He gave a small, tired shrug. "I'm saying they've got connections." I pressed him, told him about the trespassing, the harassment, the fire. He nodded slowly. "File a report, I'll put it through." But as I filled out the form, I noticed something strange. Another officer sitting a few desks away was looking at me, not just glancing, staring. And when our eyes met, he quickly turned away and started typing something into his computer. By the time I left the station, I had the uneasy feeling that my report wouldn't go anywhere. And I was right. 2 days later, I got a letter from the HOA again. But this time it wasn't about noise. It was a violation notice for defamation against community members and unauthorized contact with law enforcement. The fine $3,000. And at the bottom, signed in bold, Greg Lawson, President. I felt something snap inside me. They were mocking me now. Every move I made, they were one step ahead, like they could predict what I'd do next. I needed to find the source of their control. That's when I remembered the maintenance shed behind the HOA office. The one that wasn't supposed to exist. That night I drove there just after midnight. The street was empty, no patrols, no traffic. I parked a block away and walked the rest on foot. The shed sat behind a chain-link fence surrounded by tall hedges. There were no signs, no lights, just a padlocked door and a low electrical buzz coming from inside. I used my phone's flashlight to look closer at the lock. It wasn't standard, it was magnetic digital with a keypad. Whatever was inside, they didn't want anyone seeing it. I circled the back and found a small ventilation grate. Warm air flowed through it, carrying the faint scent of dust and machine oil. I crouched and peered through the slits and froze. Inside were rows of metal shelves filled with recording equipment. Dozens of small microphones, headsets, and labeled audio drives stacked neatly in boxes. On the far wall, a computer screen glowed faint blue, showing a grid of audio waveforms, each labeled with house numbers. My house number was on the list. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. They were listening to everyone, not just me, the entire neighborhood. Every conversation, every whisper, every argument. Suddenly, a sound: footsteps on gravel. I ducked behind a bush as two men approached the shed. One unlocked the door and the other carried a box inside. I recognized one of them immediately. It was the same short HOA officer who'd come to my door that first morning. They went inside, talking quietly, and I managed to catch fragments. "Greg wants the backups moved. He said someone been snooping around." My pulse quickened. They were going to relocate the recordings, probably before anyone could find them. I had one chance to expose them, and it had to be soon. When they left, I ran to the fence, cut a small opening with wire cutters, and slipped inside. I forced the door open with a crowbar I'd brought, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the hinges creak. Inside, the hum of machines surrounded me, rhythmic, mechanical, endless. I moved quickly, scanning through the shelves. There were hard drives labeled by date, boxes marked with street names. I plugged one into my laptop. And what I heard made my stomach twist. Voices, hundreds of them. Private conversations between neighbors, phone calls, dinner talks, even bedroom whispers. Some were crying, some were arguing, some were just living their lives, unaware they were being spied on. And then I found it. A file labeled Carter Incident 1, WAV. I played it. It was the same noise complaint audio they'd accused me of: loud yelling, glass breaking, someone shouting my name. But I recognized the sound. It wasn't my voice. It was Greg's. He staged the entire thing. I copied everything I could: the audio, the spreadsheets, the logs. Then I left before anyone could catch me. The next morning, I met Melissa at a cafe downtown. She listened in disbelief as I played the recordings. "Oh my God," she whispered, "they're spying on everyone." "We have to go public," I said, "if I can get this to the homeowners or even the local news." She cut me off, her face pale. "You don't understand. Greg's brother works for Channel 9. He'll bury it before it ever airs." That's when she handed me something. A flash drive. "I've been collecting stuff too," she said quietly. "Emails, payment receipts, fake invoices. Greg's been funneling HOA money into his private security company." I stared at her. "You knew?" She nodded. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was scared. People who cross him, they move away suddenly." I didn't ask what she meant. I could see it in her eyes. We decided to act fast. That night, we'd host a community gathering at my house, just a casual barbecue, no agenda. But when everyone arrived, I'd play the recordings, let the neighborhood hear the truth with their own ears. The plan was risky, but it felt right. By 6 p.m., the first neighbors arrived, then more, By 7, half the street was in my backyard chatting and eating like nothing was wrong. Even a few HOA board members showed up, probably to spy. But Greg didn't come. I didn't expect him to. When the moment felt right, I grabbed the microphone from my porch speaker and said, "Hey everyone, I want to show you something." The crowd quieted. I plugged my laptop into the outdoor sound system and hit play. At first, people looked confused. They heard faint voices, static, and background noise. Then the words became clear. It was Greg's voice commanding his officers to get clear proof, discussing planting audio, and laughing about how Carter won't know what hit him. Gasps filled the air. Someone muttered, "That's illegal." Another shouted, "He recorded us too." I played more, the files from other homes, the confessions, the hidden microphones. Every neighbor realized they'd been violated. Just when the crowd's anger was reaching its peak, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A black SUV. It pulled up fast, tires grinding against the pavement, and stopped right in front of my driveway. Greg stepped out. His face was red, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on me. "Turn it off," he shouted, "right now." I stood firm. They deserve to know, Greg. He took a step forward, pointing at me. "You think you're some kind of hero. You broke into private property, you stole data, you're the criminal here." The crowd murmured, unsure. He was trying to twist it again, like always. Then Melissa spoke up. She pulled out her phone, her voice trembling but clear. "I have proof of your embezzlement, Greg. Invoices, transfers, all of it." She showed the files to the nearest neighbor. They passed the phone around. Greg's expression changed. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He turned to leave, but before he reached his car, a siren wailed in the distance. Police cars turned the corner, lights flashing blue and red. Greg froze as two officers stepped out. "Greg Lawson," one of them called, "we need to speak with you about an ongoing investigation." The neighbors erupted, shouting, filming, some cheering. Greg tried to argue, but one of the officers showed him a warrant. They'd already received the recordings. I glanced at Melissa, confused. She smiled faintly. "I sent them an anonymous drop this morning, just in case you chickened out." I couldn't help but laugh, even as my hands were shaking. Greg was handcuffed, still yelling about false evidence and privacy violations. But the crowd had already turned against him. The same people who used to worship his authority were now booing him as he was led into the police car. For the first time in months, the street felt alive, not controlled, not fearful, but free. But my relief didn't last long. As the police cars drove away, one of the officers lingered. He approached me quietly, lowering his voice. "Mr. Carter, I need you to be careful. We've been following this HOA case for a while." Greg wasn't working alone. "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked around, making sure no one could hear. "There's evidence some of these recordings were being sold to companies, political groups, even private investigators. This goes deeper than your neighborhood." I stared at him, the noise of the crowd fading into a dull hum. "How deep?" He hesitated. "We don't know yet, but if you have more data, anything at all, keep it safe. You might have just exposed something bigger than you realize." That night when everyone left, I sat alone on my porch, the flicker of barbecue coals dying behind me. The air felt heavier now. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I'd just kicked open a door I didn't understand. I looked at the hard drives stacked beside me, still full of files I hadn't opened yet. Some labeled with names I didn't recognize, some labeled with government abbreviations. And one folder titled simply, Backup GL Confidential. I hesitated, then clicked it open. Inside was a single audio file. When I pressed play, a familiar voice came through the speakers, calm, cold, and deliberate. "Phase 1 complete, Ridgewood surveillance terminated, awaiting instruction for Phase 2. My blood ran cold. It was Greg's voice. It was someone else. Someone higher. And at that moment, I realized Greg wasn't the mastermind. He was just the messenger. I replayed that audio again and again, hoping I'd misheard it. But the voice was unmistakably different from Greg's, smoother, colder, like someone used to giving orders and never being questioned. Phase 1 complete, Ridgewood surveillance terminated, awaiting instruction for Phase 2. That last part echoed in my mind like a warning. Phase 2. I opened the file's details, searching for any clue about its source. Metadata showed an upload location, not Ridgewood. It was a nearby city about 30 miles east, labeled simply Central Division. What was the HOA doing with a Central Division? I copied the file to a separate drive, disconnected my laptop from Wi-Fi, and hid the data in a locked drawer. Then I sat there in the dark, staring out at the silent neighborhood. The lawns looked peaceful again, the sprinklers ticked in unison. But after what I'd heard, the calm felt artificial, like a stage set waiting for the next act. The following morning, I found something strange. Every HOA sign in the neighborhood, the ones that said Community Monitored by Ridgewood Association, had been taken down. Even their office door was gone, replaced by plywood. It was as if the entire organization had vanished overnight. No emails, no calls, no letters. Just silence. At first, the neighbors were relieved. Without the HOA breathing down our necks, people started to relax. Kids played in the street again, music drifted from open windows. But underneath the laughter, I felt a tension, like everyone knew this wasn't over. Then 3 days later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. Carter," the voice said, calm and confident. "This is Agent Brooks, Department of Federal Housing Oversight." I froze. "The what?" He continued. "We're investigating a case involving unauthorized surveillance conducted by local homeowner associations. You've been identified as a witness and a participant in evidence recovery." Participant, that word hit hard. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" I asked cautiously. "The drives you recovered, we need them. For your safety, do not share the files with anyone else." Something about his tone made me uneasy. It was too rehearsed, too smooth. I asked for identification, but he just said, "We'll send an agent to pick them up tomorrow morning." Then he hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Part of me wanted to believe they were real investigators, that justice was finally moving forward. But another part whispered something darker. What if they were the same people behind the recordings? At sunrise, I made my decision. If someone was coming for the drives, they wouldn't find them here. I packed the data into a metal case, sealed it with a lock, and drove 2 hours out of town to my brother's cabin in the woods. He was out of the country for work, so no one would be there. I hid the drives inside a hollow wall panel behind the fireplace, a trick we used to joke about as kids. When I drove back home that afternoon, a black SUV was parked across the street. 2 men sat inside, pretending to check their phones. They didn't look like neighbors. I walked calmly to my door, pretending not to notice. But inside, my pulse was racing. They knew. That night my power went out. Just mine, the rest of the neighborhood stayed lit. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched through the peephole. A man in a suit stood there, his expression blank. After a minute, he slipped an envelope through the mail slot and walked away. I waited until his car disappeared before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Return what you took. This is your final warning." No signature, no seal, no contact number. Just that. The next morning, I went to Melissa's house. Her car was in the driveway, but the front door was open just slightly. I called her name, stepping inside cautiously. The place was empty. No signs of struggle, but her laptop, phone, and hard drives were gone. On the kitchen counter sat a single cup of coffee, still warm. It felt like the air itself had been drained from the room. Melissa was gone. I ran outside, shouting her name, knocking on doors. No one had seen her leave. One neighbor said they'd heard a car around 3 a.m., but couldn't see who was inside. By evening, the police were there. They asked routine questions, wrote notes, promised to investigate. But I recognized one of the officers, the same one from the station who'd stared at me the day I filed my report. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next week was a blur. I kept to myself, locked my doors, barely slept. Every day, more strange things happened. My mail went missing, my phone restarted by itself, and twice I caught glimpses of that same SUV at the end of the block. I knew they were waiting for me to make a mistake. But I had one more card to play. Remember that final recording, the Phase 2 message? I'd noticed something in the background. A faint hum followed by a four-tone beep. It wasn't random, it was a security chime used in government facilities. I used to work with similar systems when I designed audio filters for private firms. That meant the recording wasn't made in Ridgewood or even an office. It was made in a controlled building, possibly federal. So I went digging. I searched online for any mention of federal housing oversight and found almost nothing. No official website, no address, just one archived news article from 2018 mentioning a pilot surveillance program under the same name. It was later discontinued due to privacy concerns. Except clearly, it hadn't been discontinued. I started contacting journalists, hoping one might care. Most ignored me. But one, a woman named Alina Price, replied. She'd been following rumors of corporate government partnerships in neighborhood watch programs. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't hesitate. "Don't send anything online," she said. "Meet me in person somewhere public." We met the next day at a crowded coffee shop downtown. Alina was sharp, calm eyes, steady tone, but I could tell she'd seen her share of dangerous stories. I handed her a copy of the files. As she scrolled through the names and recordings, her expression darkened. "This is worse than I thought," she murmured. "Some of these addresses, they're not just homeowners, these are government contractors, judges, even local council members." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Ridgewood wasn't the only test site." She leaned closer. "Whatever this Phase 2 is, it's bigger. If they find out you're talking to me, you won't just be harassed, you'll disappear like your friend." Her words chilled me. But I had no intention of stopping now. I'd started this and I needed it to end. That night, I drove back to the cabin to retrieve the original drives. When I arrived, something was wrong. The front door was open, and the smell of smoke hit me immediately. The inside was blackened, the entire living room charred. The fireplace wall was cracked, and the hiding spot behind it had been ripped open. The drives were gone. My stomach dropped. They'd found it. On the floor, amid the ashes, was a single object, a USB stick. It was new, clean, placed deliberately. I picked it up, half afraid of what I'd find. Back home, I plugged it into my laptop. One file, no title, no metadata. When I opened it, there was only a short audio message. "Mr. Carter, we warned you, the recordings belong to us, do not interfere with Phase 2. Then silence. Until the end, when a soft whisper added, "You're on our list now." I sat there frozen, staring at the screen, feeling every drop of adrenaline turn to ice. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Somewhere in the dark, a car engine idled for a moment, then drove away. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't a neighborhood story anymore. It was surveillance on a national scale, and I was now part of it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. For a second, I thought I'd dreamt it until I heard a knock, 3 sharp, deliberate taps. I stayed silent, the knock came again. Then a voice. "Mr. Carter, it's Agent Brooks, we need to talk." I glanced at my window, the black SUV was parked outside again. But this time there were 2 of them. I slipped out the back door, cutting through the alley to my car. I'd planned for this, the gas tank was full, my bag was packed, and I had one last copy of the files hidden inside the lining of my jacket. As I drove off, I caught a glimpse of the agents stepping into my yard, guns drawn. They weren't there to talk. I drove for hours, switching roads, avoiding highways. By sunset, I reached the old industrial district, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Alina was waiting there, just like she said she would. When I handed her the last copy, she looked at me with something between relief and fear. "Once I publish this, there's no going back," she said. "Exactly," I told her, "that's the point." She plugged the drive into her encrypted laptop and began uploading. I watched the progress bar crawl upward, 10%, 30%, 70%. Then at 91%, the screen flickered. "Connection lost." "What happened?" I asked. She stared at the display, signal interference, someone's jamming it. The lights in the warehouse blinked off, plunging us into darkness. Outside, engines roared, headlights swept across the walls. They'd found us. We ran toward the back exit, but before we could reach it, a voice echoed through the speakers, calm, familiar. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Price, you should have listened." It was Brooks. His voice came from every direction, bouncing through the empty space. Then the main doors burst open. 3 men in tactical vests stormed in, flashlights cutting through the dark. We ducked behind a row of old machinery as bullets tore through the metal. Elena grabbed my arm. "The backup, the upload server auto mirrors. If we reach a signal point, it'll resend." I nodded, scanning for a way out. There, a maintenance ladder leading to the roof. We climbed fast, hearts pounding, bullets clanging off the rails. When we reached the top, the cold wind hit us hard. The city lights glimmered in the distance. Freedom, if we could reach it. Elena pulled out her satellite phone. "Signal's weak but live," she said, typing frantically. Below us, the men spread out, flashlights sweeping the rooftop. Then Brooks stepped into the light, unarmed. "End it now and you both walk away," he called out. Elena didn't stop typing. The bar on her screen hit 95%. Brooks' tone hardened. "You don't understand what you're doing. Phase 2 isn't surveillance, it's control. We built this to prevent chaos, to predict behavior. You're exposing something the country isn't ready for." His words hung in the air like a confession. Elena hit the final key. "Too late," she said, "they'll know everything." A single gunshot cracked through the night. Elena fell beside me, her laptop sliding across the roof. I froze, her blood pooling near my hands. Brooks lowered his gun, face unreadable. "You could have walked away," he said quietly, "but you made it personal." I looked down at Elena, then at the laptop. The upload window still glowed faintly, transfer complete. A faint smile touched her lips before her eyes went still. I grabbed the laptop, bolted toward the edge of the building, and leapt onto the fire escape below. Bullets followed, but I didn't stop running. By dawn, I'd reached a small diner miles away. I turned on a TV above the counter, half expecting to see breaking news. Nothing. No leaks, no mention of the files. Just the same old morning talk shows and weather reports. Then my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Nice try, the truth never left the servers, we erased everything. Go home, Mr. Carter." My stomach twisted. I looked out the window and saw a black SUV parked across the street again. Same model, same silence. That's when I realized what Brooks had meant. Phase 2 wasn't coming. It had already started. Every camera, every streetlight, every smart device in every home, it was all part of their system now. They didn't need HOAs anymore, the network was everywhere. I left the diner, walking into the morning light with nothing but Elena's empty phone in my hand. People around me smiled, chatted, lived their ordinary lives. They had no idea someone was listening all the time. That night, back at home, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop one last time. I checked my microphone permissions disabled, my camera light off. But the little red indicator still blinked faintly. "Recording." I stared into it and whispered, "I know you're watching and I'm not done yet." Then I closed the lid. Outside, the sprinklers clicked on again, perfect rhythm, perfect timing. Just like before. The neighborhood looked peaceful, quiet, obedient. But I knew better now. Peace wasn't real here. It was programmed.